Hello, it's Daz. It's been a minute. I think this is the first upload since I turned 30. It's been a whirlwind of time. Something that came to mind because I recently saw the Watchers movie that came out and it was about fairies. And I've noticed Hollywood doing a lot more films and TV shows about fairies, such as The Changeling Apple TV series was also about fairies, sometimes called fae, and the idea of them living amongst people. The storylines, you could say, are parallel to what we think of as fallen angels and aliens, and this idea that mankind once lived side by side these other worldly beings, and that chaos broke out because these two groups, humans and aliens, angels, fairies, intermingled. They had hybrids. This parallels to Genesis 6, a lot of the Apocrypha stories, and all over ancient mythology they have legends of gods and demigods and such. And fairies are really interesting because they're known to help man or to be tricksters. They're also known to have changelings that can take on the form, and I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but if you're interested in watching it, you may want to click off, but fairies are what's in the forest that is keeping people from leaving. And they were imprisoned underground because, similar to the Watchers, they caused havoc with their hybrid children. And this concept of the forest being alive and dangerous, there was another movie I talked about not too long ago that took place in Europe as well. I believe it was The Ritual, where the forest was alive. And that one didn't have fairies in it, but it had an Old Norse god. And I do think that land is alive. I do believe that nature is very much alive. Trees, plants, even the elements, the wind, the air, all of that. Fire, earth. And there's phrases like the hills have eyes from that film about those cannibals living in the hills. And that was filmed out in the Death Valley region, I believe, of California. I've traveled a lot. I love land. I love nature. I go to national parks and remote places. I need to venture out of the United States because I have been to 10 countries, but I haven't really done like explorations of land outside of the US, but I've been all over US lands, and I do believe that nature is very much alive. My last exploration that I went on was to the southeast and Midwest regions because I was going to Cuyahoga, the Indiana Sand Dunes, Smoky Mountains, Congaree, Mammoth Cave. I feel like I'm missing one. But those regions, and as you can see, Hurricane Helene came and it devastated a lot of those regions I was in. It's crazy because I stayed a night in Bitmore in the Asheville area, and now a lot of it is flooded, and they're saying that the numbers being reported are much higher than what's happened. I've heard rumors that this is a worse disaster than Katrina. And so I find it really fascinating because that area has a lot of history. It used to be the old West Coast before there was westward expansion, and a lot of those regions of Appalachia have their own culture in remote areas. And a lot of those people lived in remote places, and so it's hard for people to get to them. And then there's rumors that the federal government is not giving the amount of aid that they thought they were going to get, like only $700, and some people are applying and not even getting that. And so it's just a whole big mess the way the disaster is being handled. And there was all the scare about Milton devastating Florida. Fortunately, it didn't make landfall quite as strong, and so there wasn't as much of an impact, but still people are suffering from these hurricanes getting slammed back to back to back. And one thing I wanted to bring up with all these natural disasters and everything going on is that I do believe land is alive. I do believe the hills have eyes. And I do believe part of it has to do with the land itself. I do think there's a such thing as land that is like cursed or evil, kind of like a haunted house, where people do go in and it tends to be a place of a lot of darkness. And that's where maybe some of these stories like the missing 411 comes in. But then I believe that some of it is affected by the entities in the forest or the desert or the mountains or wherever you're going, because that could be spirits such as angels and demons, what people think of as fairies, duendes, or many people are giants. I believe in a lot of mythology and cryptozoology, or it could be because of the people living there and the acts that they're committing, maybe because it's more secluded or remote. I go to LA all the time. I just came back from a work trip there. And whenever I fly to California from Kansas City, all I see for the last, I'd say, 2 hours of that flight is just pure desert, pure mountains. So the options are endless if you wanted to hide or do shady things. Not saying everyone living there is, but I do believe that land is alive. It does hold a lot of secrets. It's witness to what's going on there, both good and evil. When you read the book of Genesis, oftentimes when murder was committed, it talks about how the blood cried out from the earth. So that's always fascinated me. And we know that just like we could be witnesses to something, so could the trees, so could the mountains. Like that phrase, they have eyes. It could mean the land has eyes to see that. But I also believe there are places I've been. Like I talk a lot about cities, but even like land that just feels strange. Like one thing about Asheville, South Carolina for me is that I had heard that it was a vortex like Sedona. And I talked about how I went to Sedona for work, and definitely there was something energetic wise there. I didn't feel anything evil per se, but I do know a lot of people who are more new age. They may be drawn to those regions, and there may of course draw witches and stuff because they believe in like ley lines and they want to harness that energy. They say the same thing about Mount Shasta. I've been past Mount Shasta on I-5. I haven't like been to the wilderness area around it, but very beautiful, very majestic, very much God's creation. And I felt this warmth when I stared at Shasta, like a warmth in my chest. When I went to Asheville, what they say it's a vortex, I didn't necessarily feel the same connection I felt to Sedona or Shasta. Instead, I felt something was just off about the region. And I know a lot of people say it's a beautiful region and everything. It just felt off to me. And then, ironically, whenever I was leaving that area to go to Smoky Mountain, because that's where I stayed, my suitcase, first it was my mom's suitcase, it fell over like just by itself, and the next mine did, and it just seemed like there was just something weird going on there, even with the geometry. And I believe that the way things are built architecturally has a lot to do with the belief about the area. So there's definitely something to it there. Different wildernesses, whether it's a tundra, a desert, even grassland, there's different energy to it. But again, a lot of it comes from who resides there, and I do believe the land itself is alive and also gives praise to God. But I'd like to know what you guys think about that, because it seems like time and time again we're told that in films and movies and stories about certain woods and certain desert and certain land being haunted. It's one thing to hear about a home and you hear about things that happen, but I think similar to when you have a house or a building or a hospital, certain things go on that land, and because of it, certain energies have taken up residence there. So I definitely see that. There's been times where I've driven through areas or walked through areas that just didn't feel right. They felt off. Or there's been places I went and it felt really good. And that's why it's so important to have discernment and prayer. Not that I'm walking around afraid of a forest or anything, but I also use precaution, like just common sense. Like I don't want to go hiking at night in the wilderness, because there could be bears, cougars, mountain lions out there, coyotes, wolves. So let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think that the hills have eyes, that the land is very much alive, and there are places where people go and they don't return because the land itself, there's something there about the land getting them? Or do you think this is just like something people tell each other to discourage them from discovering new and beautiful territory? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a good week, and take care. God bless. Until next time.